Göbekli Tepe. Echoes from the dawn of civilization. Forget everything you think you know. Let's set aside the familiar stories for just a moment. Forget the tales of Egyptian pharaohs, draped in gold, commanding legions to build their pyramids in glory. Forget the Greek philosophers in white togas, walking the marbled halls of the Parthenon, debating the nature of the soul. Forget the paved roads of Rome, stretching across the known world. And forget the very first laws etched in cuneiform in the reed beds of Babylon. Our story begins in a place far deeper in the river of time. A place so dark, so wild, and so ancient, it almost belongs to myth. This is the story of a civilization, or perhaps something that came before civilization. This is the story of a people who rose, dreamed, and built on a scale that defies our understanding, and then vanished, long before any of those famous empires ever appeared. We are in southeastern Turkey, in the arid highlands of Anatolia. This is a land of barren, wind-swept hills, where trees struggle to survive and the dust of millennia settles in the valleys. Here, near the border with Syria, there is one particular hill. It is not tall, nor is it very impressive. Its peak is rounded, and it bulges in a peculiar way, as if something is sleeping just beneath its skin. For generations beyond counting, the local shepherds and farmers called it by a simple, descriptive name, Göbekli Tepe, which in Turkish just means Potbelly Hill. For thousands of years, it was just a hill, a place to graze sheep, a landmark on a desolate horizon. Farmers tilling the thin soil would occasionally find exquisitely carved, leaf-shaped pieces of flint. But these were dismissed as curiosities. They believed this hill was a sacred place, yes, but a recent one. They assumed it was a forgotten Islamic or Byzantine cemetery. The large rectangular limestone slabs that poked strangely from the earth were assumed to be broken, weathered tombstones. They respected it as a place of the dead, but they had no idea what they were standing on. Nobody knew, not a soul. Until one fateful day in 1994. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, who had been working in the region for many years, was looking for a new site. He happened to read an old, obscure report from the 1960s, written by surveyors who had visited this very hill. That report was dismissive. It concluded the hill was of no significance, just a medieval graveyard. But Schmidt, with the trained eyes of an expert in the Stone Age, had a hunch. Something about the description of the flints didn't add up. He paid a visit to the Potbelly Hill. Instantly, he knew. This was no Byzantine cemetery. The ground was not just scattered with flints. It was covered in an unbelievable, suffocating density of them. These were tools. They were the debris from making tools. There were tens of thousands. No, hundreds of thousands of pieces. This was a place of human activity on an almost industrial scale, a flint knapping factory, but from an incredibly ancient time. And then he looked at the tombstones. They were not tombstones. He could see with his expert eye that they were the tops of massive, T-shaped megalithic pillars carved with clear intention, sleeping just inches beneath the thin, windswept soil. Schmidt realized it immediately. This was not the discovery of a single season. This was not a minor finding. This was the discovery of a lifetime. He had found something that wasn't just old, it was impossible. He decided, in that moment, to dedicate the rest of his life to this single hill. He bought a house in a nearby village, gathered a team, and began to dig. He had no idea, not truly, that he was about to unearth a mystery that would fundamentally rewrite the very first chapter of human history. The giants awaken. As Schmidt and his team began their careful excavation, as the dust of 10,000 years was brushed away, the hill began to tell its astonishing story. This was not a village. This was the first and most important fact. There were no houses. There were no cooking hearths. There were no trash pits filled with the refuse of daily domestic life. This was something else entirely. They found a temple. No, a complex of temples. Layer by layer, the soil was peeled back, revealing not one but many massive circular structures, built with clear, deliberate purpose. The oldest and most impressive of these is called Enclosure D. Imagine a perfect stone circle, 30 meters or 100 feet across. Its outer walls are made of rough, unworked stone, built like a retaining wall against the hillside. But set deep into that wall, facing inward, are colossal T-shaped megalithic pillars. And in the very center, towering over everything, are the two largest pillars. They stand nearly 6 meters, or 18 feet tall. They weigh an estimated 10 to 20 tons each. These are the true giants. They were carved from a single solid block of limestone, hewn from a quarry in a valley more than a kilometer away. Now, try to imagine this. A people with no metal tools, only other stones. A people with no wheels, not even a potter's wheel. A people with no draft animals, no domesticated oxen or horses to pull their burdens. These people carved, moved, and erected these stones, each as heavy as 2 full-grown elephants, with an astonishing, incomprehensible precision. But what truly took their breath away wasn't the size. It was the art. These pillars were not blank, lifeless stones. They were sculptures. They were alive with meaning. Klaus Schmidt quickly realized they were clearly anthropomorphic. They were stylized human figures. On the narrow edges of the 2 great central pillars, the ancient artists had carved long, slender arms in low relief. These arms run down the shoulders of the T-shape, and the hands, with long, delicate fingers, curl around the pillar's belly, as if in a solemn ritual posture. Below this, they are adorned with carved belts and loincloths made of animal pelts. These are stylized, faceless beings. They are not portraits of people, but perhaps representations of gods or ancestors, or the priests who served them. They are standing there, silent and faceless, facing one another, as if locked in a permanent, secret, sacred ceremony. And then, they looked at the surfaces of the other pillars. They were covered in a living world of animals. These were not the gentle, familiar animals of a farm. This was a menagerie of power, of fear, and of the wild, untamed world. Leopards were carved in high relief, snarling and stalking down the sides of the stone. Foxes, wild boars, and giant, extinct aurochs, wild cattle, run in chaotic herds. There are cranes, ducks, and most terrifyingly, countless images of twisting snakes, venomous scorpions, and spiders. These animals were not painted. They were carved, often in deep, 3-dimensional relief, a technique that requires extraordinary skill and confidence. They seemed to be dancing, crawling, and running across the stone, a frozen snapshot of a prehistoric cosmos, as if they were all frozen in a single, vivid moment. The shock of the timeline. Klaus Schmidt knew he had found something extraordinary. But just how ancient was it? The answer lay in the fill. The people who built this site had, for reasons we will explore, intentionally buried their own creation. To get a date, Schmidt and his team carefully collected organic materials from deep within this fill, right at the base of the pillars. They found tiny fragments of charcoal from ancient fires, and bits of animal bone from long-ago feasts, all of it trapped in the ancient mortar and the soil used to fill the enclosures. They sent these precious samples to laboratories for radiocarbon dating. When the results came back, even Schmidt, a man who suspected the impossible, could not believe them. The number, it couldn't be right. It had to be a contamination, a mistake. They checked again. And then they checked again. Different labs, testing different samples from different enclosures, all returned the same, impossible result. The oldest structures at Göbekli Tepe were built around 9600 BC, 9,600 years before Christ. This means, as of today, Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. Let's take a minute to truly, deeply understand what that number means. The Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, the very symbol of ancient human achievement, was built around 2,560 BC. Göbekli Tepe is 7,000 years older. The time separating Göbekli Tepe from the pyramids is longer than the time separating the pyramids from us. Stonehenge, that other great megalithic mystery in England, was started around 3000 BC. Göbekli Tepe is 6,500 years older. The first writing, Sumerian cuneiform, which we mark as the beginning of history, appeared around 3200 BC. This site is 6,000 years older than writing itself. The first pottery in this region appeared around 7000 BC. The people who built this knew nothing of pottery. They were a pre-pottery Neolithic society. This place was built at the end of the last ice age. As these pillars were being raised, woolly mammoths still walked the earth in parts of Siberia. The world was still transforming, emerging from a frozen planet into the one we know today. And here is the biggest shock, the most impossible story, the greatest paradox of all. It was built by hunter-gatherers. The paradox of the temple builders. For the entire 20th century, we built a very neat and tidy story of human ascent. It was a simple, logical progression. That story, called the Neolithic Revolution, goes like this. Step 1. Agriculture. Around 9000 BC, humans invent farming. They learn to domesticate wheat, barley, sheep, and goats. Step 2. Settlement. Farming creates a stable food supply, and for the first time, a surplus. This surplus allows nomadic hunter-gatherers to settle down in permanent villages. Step 3. Complex society. Villages grow into towns, and then cities. The food surplus allows some people not to farm. They become craftsmen, soldiers, priests, and kings. Social stratification is born. Step 4. Religion and monuments. Only then. Once society is stable, wealthy, and complex, do they have the time, the resources, and the organized labor to build great monuments and develop organized, complex religion? It was a logical story. Agriculture is the engine. Civilization is the result. Göbekli Tepe rises from the earth and screams, "No, your entire story is in the wrong order." Klaus Schmidt proposed a theory that changes everything, a theory that is still sending shockwaves through archaeology today. And it is the key to understanding this place. This is what Göbekli Tepe shows us. Hunter-gatherers, before cities and before widespread agriculture, already possessed a spiritual life, a worldview, and a symbolic system that was complex beyond our wildest imaginations. They were not just small, isolated bands of 20 or 30 people wandering the plains, as we had always assumed. Somehow, they had the social organization to gather hundreds, perhaps thousands of people from many different tribes across a vast region, all at a single central location. They had architects to plan these complex enclosures. They had engineers to manage the logistics of the quarrying and transport. And they had artists of breathtaking, specialized skill. And most importantly, they had a reason so powerful it compelled them to undertake this monumental, multi-generational effort. Schmidt's hypothesis was this: it was the very desire to build this temple, the shared, communal need to express their cosmology, that forced humanity to innovate. They didn't gather because they had food. They had to invent a way to get food because they wanted to gather. The evidence is in the hill itself. Archaeologists have found tens of thousands of animal bones at the site, not in cooking pits, but in the fill, mostly gazelle and wild cattle. This is evidence of massive ritualistic feasts, feeding hundreds of workers for a building project that lasted decades or centuries, requires a stable, reliable food supply. Spiritual desire drove economic innovation. The area around Göbekli Tepe is the exact place where plant geneticists have identified the genetic origin of einkorn wheat. This is the very first wheat that was domesticated. Perhaps the builders of this temple were the first to realize that instead of just gathering the wild grain that grew on the hillsides, they could plant it right here to supply their great feasts, and, according to one fascinating theory, to brew the world's very first beer, a ritualistic drink for these sacred gatherings. In other words, the temple came first. The city only came later. Civilization did not begin with the stomach and the need for material things. It began with the mind, with an idea, with a shared story, with a need to connect to the cosmos. The final story of the giants, Göbekli Tepe, was used for more than a millennium and a half, 2,500 years. Think about that span of time. It is longer than the entire history of the Roman Empire, from its founding to its fall. For 50 generations, people came here, labored here, feasted here, and worshipped in the shadow of these T-shaped pillars. And then, the story takes its final, strangest turn. Around 8,200 BC, they did something inexplicable. They buried it on purpose. This was not a collapse. It wasn't destroyed by an earthquake. It wasn't conquered and torn down by an enemy. The very people who built it, or their descendants, spent decades, perhaps centuries, meticulously, deliberately filling in these magnificent stone circles. They brought in millions of tons of soil, rubble, and the bones from their final feasts, and completely entombed their giants in a massive, man-made grave. They hid their greatest creation, turning it back into a hill, the Potbelly Hill. And then they walked away. Why? We will never know for sure. Perhaps the belief system changed. Perhaps new gods arrived, and the old gods had to be respectfully interred, put to sleep. Perhaps the world around them changed. The Ice Age finally ended. The climate warmed, and the vast herds of gazelle they hunted migrated away. Their hunter-gatherer lifestyle was no longer possible, and as they fully embraced agriculture and village life, their old, wild religion lost its meaning. Or perhaps, in a great prophetic act, they knew their era was over, and they wanted to seal their story, to keep it safe from the ravages of time, until a distant future world, maybe us, was ready to listen. Klaus Schmidt, the man who woke the giants, passed away suddenly in 2014. He gave 20 years of his life to this hill, and in doing so, he gave humanity back a history we never knew we had. And the most incredible part? Geophysical surveys, scans of the ground, have shown that what he excavated, those world-changing circles, are only 5% of what is still hidden beneath the hill. At least 15 to 20. More megalithic enclosures, some perhaps even larger and even older, are still sleeping, waiting beneath the earth. The story of Göbekli Tepe is not over. We have only just read the first page of a long-lost book. The hill is still keeping its secrets, whispering of a dawn of humanity. When hunter-gatherers dreamed of gods and decided to build them a home, and in doing so, accidentally invented our world.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, learned something new, or simply want to see more content like this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.